He walked out the way Will Smith always walks out, like the world was a room he had personally arranged for maximum joy. The smile arrived before he did. You could feel it coming through the curtain, the particular electricity of a man who had been performing his own best version of himself for so long that the performance and the person had become genuinely indistinguishable. He bounded onto the late show stage with that enormous, weaponized warmth that had made him one of the most beloved entertainers on the planet for 4 decades, pointed at people in the front row, did a small spin that he absolutely did not need to do, and had 300 people on their feet before Stephen could say a word. This was Will Smith, the Fresh Prince, the Concussion, the Ali, the King Richard, the man who had proven over and over again in a career that had refused every ceiling placed above it that he could be whatever any given moment required. Funny, dramatic, action hero, everyman, the man you root for because rooting for him feels like rooting for something fundamentally good about the world. He settled into the guest chair, still grinning, still radiating, still filling the room with the particular quality of light that only certain people carry with them wherever they go. Stephen greeted him warmly. The band played, and for the first several minutes everything moved in the bright, generous rhythm of two professionals who enjoyed each other's company and knew how to make a room feel like a party. They talked about the new project, about what it felt like to still be finding roles that surprised him, roles that asked something new of him after 40 years of being asked everything. They talked about his family, about fatherhood, about what it meant to have watched his children step into their own creative lives and feel the particular pride of a parent who recognizes something of themselves in the next generation without needing it to be a mirror. Will was warm and funny and entirely present, giving the conversation everything it asked for, which was considerable, because Stephen was a good interviewer and Will was a generous subject, and together they made something that felt effortless even though effortlessness of that particular quality requires enormous work. And then Stephen set down his note cards. Will, he said, I want to ask you something that has nothing to do with your new film. Will raised an eyebrow. Uh-oh. When you were coming up, Stephen said carefully, early in your career, before Fresh Prince or right at the beginning of it, was there a moment where someone said something to you that you've never been able to let go of? Will's smile held. He opened his mouth to answer and then closed it again. A very small thing. Most people in the room probably missed it, but Stephen didn't miss it. Not a compliment, Stephen added, something harder than that. Will looked at him. The smile was still there, but something behind it had shifted, the way a painting looks different when the light in the room changes. Yeah, Will said quietly, there was. Stephen waited. I was 22, Will said. This was right at the beginning of Fresh Prince. The show was just starting, I was just starting, everything was brand new and terrifying in that specific way that exciting things are terrifying when you're young enough to understand that they could still go wrong. He paused. I was on a set, not the Fresh Prince set, something else, a meeting for something else, and there was a producer there, a man who had been in the industry for a very long time. And he was watching me in that way that people in power watch young people, evaluating, categorizing, deciding what box to put you in before you've had a chance to decide yourself. Stephen was completely still. And at some point he pulled me aside, Will continued. Not aggressively, not cruelly, just matter-of-factly the way people say things when they believe they're being helpful. And he said, Will stopped. He said, you're going to have a good career. You're likable, you're charismatic, you're entertaining. But I need you to understand something. You're a showman, not an actor. There's a difference. Actors disappear into characters. Showmen make every character disappear into them. And you, Will's voice changed. You are always going to be Will Smith playing a role, and that's okay. That's a perfectly good career, but you should know what you are. The studio was quiet. What did you do? Stephen asked. I smiled, Will said, because that's what I did then, that's what I did with everything. I smiled and I said something charming and I walked out of that room. He paused. And then I went to my car and I sat there for I don't know an hour, maybe longer, and I cried, really cried. The kind of crying where you're not performing the emotion, you're just in it, and it has nothing to do with anyone watching because nobody was watching. He looked at his hands. And then I stopped crying, Will said. And I made a decision. I decided that man was wrong. I decided I was going to spend the rest of my career proving that he was wrong. Every serious role, every dramatic choice, every time I turned down something comfortable to try something that scared me, that was me arguing with a man whose name I don't even remember anymore, in a room I can barely picture, about a sentence he said to me when I was 22 years old. Subscribe and leave a comment because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Stephen leaned forward, and were you proving him wrong? Will was quiet for a long moment, the longest pause of the conversation, a pause that had weight that the entire studio seemed to hold its breath inside of. I don't know, he said finally. That's the honest answer. I genuinely don't know because here's the thing. He stopped, started again. Here's the thing I've been sitting with for a long time. Every time I got close, every time a performance landed the way I needed it to, every time a director told me I disappeared into something, every time I felt like maybe I'd actually done it, my first thought was about him. Not about the work, not about the character, about that sentence. About whether this was finally enough to prove it wrong. He looked up. And I started to wonder, Will said, whether I had spent 40 years not building a career but fighting a verdict. Whether every choice, every risk, everything I pushed myself toward, whether any of it was actually about what I wanted. Or whether I had just been living inside someone else's sentence for 4 decades without knowing how to get out. The first tear came then. Will Smith, who had cried on screen in 100 different ways for 100 different characters, letting a real tear sit on his face in front of 300 people and not doing anything with it, not performing it, not redirecting it. Just letting it be there. Stephen stood up from behind his desk without announcement and walked around to sit on the edge of it, facing Will directly. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just sat there, close, present. Will, he said finally, I want to ask you something and I need you to actually answer it, not the answer that sounds good, the real one. Will looked at him. What do you want? Stephen said. Not what you've proven, not what you've achieved, not what you've built. What do you actually want from the work? If that man had never said that sentence, if you'd never had anything to prove, what would you have made? Will stared at him, and something moved across his face that was different from anything that had appeared there all night. Not grief, exactly. Not regret, exactly. Something more complicated, the expression of a man who has just been asked a question he has been avoiding for a very long time and has run out of room to keep avoiding it. I don't know, Will said. His voice was rough. Both eyes were wet now. And that's the most frightening thing I've ever said out loud, because I'm 56 years old and I've made over 100 projects and I don't know what I would have made if I hadn't spent all of it arguing with a man in a room I can barely remember. He paused. I don't know who I would have been. Stephen looked at him steadily. I think you would have been exactly who you are, Stephen said, because here's what I know from watching your work. The thing that makes it land, the thing that makes people feel it isn't the craft, it isn't the preparation, it isn't the discipline, though all of that is real and visible and extraordinary. It's the need. The specific human undisguisable need to be seen, to be recognized, to matter to the room. He paused. That man gave you a sentence, but the need was already there. It was always there. It's why you got on a stage in the first place, and no sentence gives a person that. That comes from somewhere deeper, that comes from who you are. Will pressed one hand briefly over his eyes, then lowered it. His expression was raw and open in a way that was genuinely rare, not the controlled vulnerability of a press junket, not the performed emotion of a scene, but the specific, unguarded face of a man who has just said something he cannot take back and is discovering that not taking it back feels unexpectedly like relief. I've never said any of that to anyone, Will said. Not my wife, not my therapist, not any of the people who know me best. He shook his head slightly. I spent 40 years running from a sentence and I never told anyone what the sentence was. You just did, Stephen said simply. Will looked at him, and then slowly the smile returned. But different this time, not the weaponized warmth of the entrance, not the performance smile that filled rooms before he'd said a word. Something smaller and more real, the smile of a man who has just set something down. Yeah, Will said, I just did. Stephen looked out at the audience. If you're watching this and you're carrying someone else's sentence, he said, someone else's verdict on who you are, what you're capable of, or what kind of life you deserve, hear this. The sentence is not the truth. The sentence is their limitation, not yours. And the extraordinary thing about Will Smith is not that he proved one man wrong. It's that he showed millions of people what's possible when you refuse to accept someone else's definition of your ceiling, even if the refusal costs you something. Even if you spend 40 years not fully knowing why you're running. He turned back to Will. You know what I think? I think the work was yours, all of it. Every character, every risk, every moment you went somewhere nobody expected you to go. That man didn't make you do any of it, you did it. And the fact that you've been carrying his sentence doesn't mean he was driving. It means you were running faster than you needed to, and now, Stephen smiled. Now you can slow down. Will laughed, a real one, helpless and unguarded, the kind that surprises the person laughing. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and shook his head and laughed again. Man, he said, I did not come here to do this tonight. Nobody ever does, Stephen said. That's usually when it matters most. The applause that followed started slowly and built with the particular quality of 300 people responding to something they hadn't expected and weren't quite ready for. Not the reflexive applause of a television audience, but the involuntary response of people who had witnessed something true being said in a room they were lucky enough to be sitting in. Will Smith had spent 40 years arguing with a sentence. Tonight, for the first time, he had said the sentence out loud. And in saying it, in finally letting it exist in the open air rather than in the closed room he had been carrying it in, he had done something that no amount of proving had been able to do. He had let it go. That night, laughter gave way to grace, and television remembered what it was for.